Today we're going to take a look at the fraction converter challenge from Topcoder. Now I've built a fraction converter file which takes in a fraction as a string and then converts it either into a mixed number, a whole number, or a reduced fraction. It does take negative signs into account, so if it's a signed number, it will return the appropriate sign at the end of the file or method. If both the numerator and denominator are signed, it will in fact return a positive fraction or mixed number upon completion. All right, so let's take a quick walkthrough. The first and main method is mixed fraction, and this is what will be called by the RSpec or the test file later. It takes in fraction as a string. Okay, and then the first thing it does is it's checking to see if the output is going to be negative. The reason I do this first is because if my output is negative, I'm going to add that negative sign to the beginning of the output. And if it's positive, then my output is going to be positive, so I don't have a negative sign to add to the string at the end. Then I create the fraction. Now, the fraction is going to use several of my methods built out, the helper methods, to actually create this fraction, a numerical or integer fraction, or integer part fraction. And this is to remove it from the string to get rid of the negative or the minus symbols in the string so that I'm just manipulating numbers. All right, so let's go back real quick just to the output, and the output is going to check to see if the fraction is negative. So the way it does this is it calls the negative question mark with the string as a fraction, and it's going to set a value for count. Now this count value is to count the number of minus symbols in the string. So for each character, it increments the count by 1 if the character is a minus symbol or a dash. Then it returns whether or not the count is odd. If it's odd, then of course the fraction at the end is going to be negative. If it's even, it's going to be positive. Okay, so going back to the fraction variable here, the first method that I call is getFraction. And what it's doing is it's getting the fraction, but we're going to manipulate the string a little bit. We're using the built-in tr method that basically replaces values within a string, and I'm replacing all the dashes or minus symbols or negative symbols with a blank character or just with nothing. So this will return, or this will create a string that is just numerical or numerals. Then it gets the fraction. Now what I'm doing with the get the fraction is I'm going to actually create an array of numbers. So I'm taking the string fraction and I'm going to split it on the division symbol. And then I'm mapping each of those splits to integers. Okay, and that's what's going to be returned. So now I have an array of numerals or integers that have been split on the division symbol. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the fraction. Now just like math, it's typically easier to reduce a fraction before I start manipulating it. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce. Now the reduce fraction takes that array, that fraction array, or the array of integers, and it's going to find the greatest common denominator of those integers. So it just sets a value GCD, the greatest common denominator, equal to the fraction 0 using the greatest common denominator of the fraction 1 value. And then it's going to divide each of those numerals by the greatest common denominator and return that. So if the greatest common denominator is 1, then the fraction is going to be returned as what was passed in. If there's a greater common denominator, let's say we're dealing with even numbers like 2 and 4, so if my numerator is 2 and my denominator is 4, then the greatest common denominator between those two numbers is 2, so the reduced fraction returned will be 1/2, or 1, 2 for the array. Okay, so it does return the array, and then the next method called is mixNumber. Now what mixNumber does is it converts the fraction into a mixed number, and it returns the fraction with a whole number now in the array. And what I do with that whole number is I just append it to the end or push it to the end of the array, so that if it is a mixed number, and a mixed number is just a whole number and a fraction, if it is a mixed number, then that whole number is the third value in the array. Okay. And so what I do is I take in the number and I make sure if the fraction 0 divided by the fraction 1, so if the numerator divided by the denominator is greater than 0, which means that it now has a whole number, and the numerator modulus by the denominator is greater than 0, then I definitely have a mixed number here. So I will definitely have a whole number and a fraction. Okay, and that was the goal of this method here. So I push the divided number, and again this is floor divided, into the fraction array, and I make the numerator, remember that numerator has to be reduced by the amount, and so all I do is I take the numerator modulus the denominator, and that's pushed into that numerator point, or the 0 index of the fraction array. Then I return the fraction, so that is my mixed number. So now my fraction, if it is a mixed number, it has a length of 3. If it's not a mixed number, it still has a length of 2. And whether or not it's a whole number, that's what we find out later. Okay, so now that I have my fraction as an array of numbers, then I check to see if it is equal to 0. So return the string 0 if fraction 0, or the numerator, equals or is 0. So if it is, it returns 0. However, if it's not, it will return the output. Now remember, the output is either negative or positive depending on what happened with that negative question mark method, plus fraction 0 to s if fraction.length is equal to 2, and the fraction is a whole number. Now I check the whole number only by using the whole number only method, and this is going to simply check to see if fraction 1, or the denominator, is equal to 1. If the denominator, or fraction 1, is equal to 1, then any number divided by 1 is that number, which would return the whole number. So again, if it's a whole number only, it's going to return the output plus fraction 0 to string, because again, it just needs to return that numerator because it's a whole number. However, if the fraction length is 2 and it is not a whole number only, then I have to return the fraction. Now this is going to be the reduced fraction because we use the reduce up here. So it's going to return the output, whether or not it's positive or negative, plus the reduced fraction. And that reduced fraction is simply the string of the numerator divided by the denominator. Notice no math is going on here because these are just strings and values within the string. And then finally, if it is a mixed number, it will return the output, whether or not that's positive or negative, plus the whole number, which is the value at fraction index 2, a space, and then fraction 0 dash, or I'm sorry, slash fraction 1, or the numerator over the denominator. All right, so these are what's being returned here. So we can go ahead and check that, and we can actually do that. So let's build a quick little test file, test method. So if the program name is equal to the file, we want to run mixed fraction, and then we'll just give it a string of, let's go 43 and 6, okay? And we want to print that, so puts we'll just use the inspect print and end. So again, we are testing, we are changing or converting the mixed fraction 43 over 6, and we will just run that file real fast. And we get 7 and 1/6. So this is the string that is returned if we run the file with 43 over 6 as the input string. Then the next thing that we need to do obviously is run the rspec. So let's clear our screen real fast. We'll move this up. Okay, and then bundle exec rspec, and then according to the readme file, we run spec /converter spec.rb. So we have 10 examples. Converts improper fraction to mixed number, converts improper fraction to whole number, reduces fractions and handles negative number in the denominator, reduces to 0 when numerator is 0 and denominator is not 0. Remember, we have to be very specific about that. Converts fractions to mixed number with negative numerator, converts fractions to mixed number with negative denominator, converts fractions to a positive number when negative numerator and denominator, must raise zero division error, and there are actually 2 zero division error methods that we're testing in the rspec. So let's go ahead and take a look at that spec file real fast. Okay, so here are the basic methods. Converts improper fractions, so it does that. Converts improper fractions to a whole number, so we get our whole number. Reduces fractions, notice this isn't an improper fraction, so it should be reduced to 2/3. Reduces fractions and handles negative numbers in the denominator. So this was kind of a tricky test. It was showing us the negative in the denominator rather than the numerator, and it still returns negative 2/3. Reduces to 0 when the numerator is 0 and the denominator is not 0. That's very, very important, because if the denominator is 0, you get a zero division error. Converts fraction to mixed number with negative numerator. Okay, so our negative numerator, and we get our negative mixed number. Converts fraction to a mixed number with negative denominator. Again, that tricky scenario with the negative denominator still gives us the correct improper fraction. Or I'm sorry, mixed number. Converts fraction to a positive number with negative numerator and denominator. So again, another tricky portion, negative 22 over negative 7. So the fraction for what's nearest to pi becomes 3 and 1/7. Okay, so notice that's a positive 3. Must raise a zero division error, and this is even with 0 in the numerator. Okay, so if it's 0 over 0, it should still raise that zero division error because we're dividing by 0. Must raise zero division error when the numerator is not 0. So 3 divided by 0 still raises that zero division error. Okay, so as you can see, the rspec is built out. The rspec tests true for each of these, and that covers the entire test. If there are any questions or comments, please post them in the forum, and I will answer them as soon as possible. Thank you.